My name's Kelly Rozovsky and I work for Dewberry. I've spent the last 9 years working in this particular FEMA program. It's called Public Assistance. Recovery is a long process. So what I do every day is, hopefully always new to you because you don't have to recover all the time. So I really just wanted the opportunity to share, in particular with the local governments in this disaster. I wanted to give you the background information that you would need to know that you qualify and you're eligible and you have needs that can be addressed by this program. There's a ton of information and I tried really hard to cut out all of the terminology and the deep dive into policy. But please ask questions as I'm going through it so we can address them later. I'm going to go through my slides with some examples towards the end. And then open it up to a discussion. So if you're familiar with the program, already have questions, I encourage you to ask those at the end. With that said, just figure out technology here. Okay, I just wanted a quick opportunity to introduce Dewberry. Dewberry's a nationwide engineering company. We have 3 office locations in New Jersey. We offer a number of services. One of our service areas is in recovery and disaster services. So we do have focused areas on mitigation, preparedness, and resiliency, but we as well have served FEMA for over 30 years as one of their federal contractors for their various programs, public assistance being one of them. So we've responded to over 1,200 disaster declarations as a FEMA surge support. We've been in the field with applicants. We also have worked with state and local partners, and this is a map that just demonstrates some of our more recent state and local partners in the recovery disaster preparedness area that we've worked. As I said before, I wrote this presentation for local government, so I tried to put myself in your shoes. Previously, before Dewberry, I worked for FEMA, and we would go out in the fields, and we would sit in a public works office, and we would hold a kickoff meeting, and we would walk through all of the damages from a particular event. So I've been in your shoes in that regard. It's actually my favorite opportunity when I do this kind of work because it's meeting real people with real impacts, and it was always a very rewarding job to show them that they are eligible under this program and they can work on their financial recovery through this reimbursement program called Public Assistance. So in crafting this, I didn't want it to be verbose. I wanted to cut to what questions you might have. We're in the middle of a disaster. Usually FEMA comes in after the response phase has sort of cleared up. In this event, the public assistance program was activated to allow agencies like yours to know that funding was coming, to encourage you to spend the cost that you need to get the resources that you need while protecting public health and safety. So it's a pretty unique position for FEMA to be in during the actual event. But what I wanted to do was to point you in the direction of where you can get more information. I'm going to have a couple of assumptions about you being an eligible applicant because there's a lot to go through for that. And basically, I wanted to give you a brief overview of public assistance, what this FEMA program is, point you to the contacts you're going to need and the documents that you're going to need if you want to handle this on your own. I'm going to outline for you the first couple steps to get the ball rolling. And I'll touch briefly on applicant eligibility, but that's not the focus of this talk. Then I'm going to go into what this disaster is. It was declared for the COVID-19 pandemic. What that means, what's eligible under it, what's not is different than Sandy recovery, for instance. So we'll go through a couple of the things that makes this unique. And then I figured you just want to know, what am I doing? How do I do this? So I thought I would come up with some hypothetical situations and we would just walk through, talk about them. So that's the presentation. What is public assistance? You know, this is a picture from Sandy. I actually am still working on a recovery project in New Jersey from Hurricane Sandy. So, you know, of all the states to participate in this program, New Jersey is well equipped. Your state agency is very good and they know what they're doing, and they still are working side by side with FEMA today on Sandy and other recovery. But that doesn't mean that everybody who may be impacted today has, you know, went through impacts from Sandy. So I'm not going to make that assumption, but most generally, FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So they're the federal agency that can support the local state emergency management agencies. FEMA has 2 financial recovery programs. Public assistance is for public agencies or private nonprofit agencies that are serving a public function. It is for the public, it's for infrastructure and governments. Individual assistance is the program that is for homeowners and businesses and others. I'm going to talk in this presentation about the public assistance program. FEMA also has a variety of hazard mitigation programs, and there's the potential for hazard mitigation to be added to this disaster, but that's still up in the air, and I'm not going to discuss that today. Okay, so federal funding doesn't just come during a recovery or a response like this normally. The president in this case activated this program. Normally a state is overwhelmed by a disaster and they have to request the public assistance program to come to the state. So it's important just to know there are 3 players in this. There's the local government agencies, there's the state emergency management agency, and there's the federal emergency management agency. In this event, the president originally signed an emergency declaration to cover everyone in the country so that some emergency work would be covered through public assistance. Then the states asked for a major disaster declaration to be made, and New Jersey has received a major disaster declaration for this. In big picture, this is a reimbursement program, so we're talking about this because these are costs that you've likely already spent, and what you need to do is document those costs in the correct way so that you can get a reimbursement grant for those, so reimbursement payment. And the public assistance program, it's federally funded, but it's at a federal state cost share. So the federal amount for this program is 75%, and that's likely to stay that way. Sandy, for instance, was 90%. Sometimes they do adjust the percents. These are costs that you've already spent, so it's not that you have to come up with another 25%. This is, you'll present the total project cost, and the state and the federal and FEMA will review it, and then if they agree with all of your costs, they'll give you 75% of what you presented. So the public assistance program is delivered through the state emergency management program. Your state emergency management agency is the Office of Emergency Management. These websites are where you want to go to get information for your next steps. We'll get into that. But the ready.nj.gov is the emergency management agency's sort of general website. The NJOEM is the site that you want to write down. And it's the site that's in this picture on the right. There's a tab at the top that says COVID-19 PA info, and that's where all of the resources that you're going to need can be found. Okay, so big picture, this is a program that's administered by FEMA, but it's delivered to you through the state. In this incident, which we'll discuss, FEMA is overwhelmed by the fact that this is going on nationwide, and they have other responsibilities in COVID-19. So as an agency, they have decided to do a very simple approach to delivering this program. They're going to do everything virtually through their web portal. And what that means is this great experience I had when I worked for FEMA sitting in a public works office and getting to know these people and helping them through the paperwork is not available under this disaster. So it was important for me to add in here, where do you go for information? You don't want to just be searching the web. New Jersey Office of Emergency Management is your contact, and they are going to take the place of FEMA as best they can. But I wanted you to know sort of PA program standard information. Where do you go to get the facts? So due to the fact that FEMA is not going to be knocking on your door, what you want to do is get familiar with the New Jersey EMgrants.org website and all of the data there. Contact them, get your name on their list so they know to reach out to you when they have updates and there's changes from FEMA. Download the 2018 policy guide for this program. It's a lot of information, but it is you know, in some cases they're by the book on many aspects of this. So it's something that it's a PDF, so you can search it. You can search for the applicable components, and hopefully you can pull out of that what you need to know. But the policy guide, we refer to it as the Papa G. It's a 2018 one. You can get to it through FEMA. You can Google it, or you can find it on the New Jersey OEM website. Okay, so I'm trying really hard to not dive deep into all the aspects of what's eligible and what's not, because that would take way too long. But the FEMA has what's called an eligibility pyramid for this program. The things that make you an eligible applicant are something that New Jersey OEM has covered in their presentation. If you're an eligible applicant and you had damages at an eligible facility, those are kind of the foundation elements of if you can then wrap up your costs and apply for funding. So the facility and the, no, hold on just one second. So the information I just gave you, that Papa G, this is a baseline. The program is the program is the program. Every disaster is a little bit different, and FEMA will come out with new information about how to interpret parts of their eligible code. So, but the applicant, whether or not you can participate is pretty black and white, and the state can help you to determine that. The facility really, in this case, is going to be anybody in New Jersey. Is part of the designated area. So the applicant and the facility are things I'm not really going to touch on, but those are the foundation of this. You can't put costs forward if you're not able to participate in the program. Oops. The top part of the pyramid, the work and the cost, that's what I'm going to focus on here. For a municipality, you need to be able to document that you've performed eligible work under the COVID-19 disaster declaration. So this is where it gets really specific to this event. The cost is only eligible if the work is eligible. So that's why it's layered in the way that it is. So you'll see this pyramid again throughout, and I'm tried to avoid putting it in, but it's really hard to not have it here. So what do you guys have to do? I gave you a really brief overview of what the program is. I think you're all here because you just want to know. I mean, you might not even know if you're eligible. This doesn't matter. This is what you do. You go to contact the Office of Emergency Management. New Jersey, I work with them on another project, the OEM, and they're very well organized. They have their own online portal. It's called New Jersey Emergency Management Grants. So this website, the NJOEMgrants.org, is where you want to go to do a couple of things. You want to attend their applicant briefing. Everything's virtual. They've already held their applicant briefing, so it's just a PowerPoint that you can flip through with some comments on it. I took the slide from the applicant briefing. This applicant briefing goes through steps, just like I am. So your first step, according to the applicant briefing, is to go to the New Jersey EMgrants page, look at the red banner, and you want to fill out a request for public assistance. So really, the very first thing you do is contact the state agency, because they're the ones who are going to facilitate the program for you. You have to sign up for the program. It's not just applied to everybody. You have to say, I think I have eligible costs and damages due to this incident, so I'm going to go and sign up. Normally, there's a deadline for this RPA form, the request for public assistance. Because we're in the incident, there's no deadline yet because it's usually based on the end date of the incident period. But go and fill it out now. I spoke to New Jersey OEM. They have about 400 request forms in, and they're expecting more. They're going to want to help you. Everybody wants to help you. So contact them if you have any technical problems or anything like that. The major disaster declaration number is DR 4480. I put it in here in case that comes up in your paperwork. Otherwise, it's a one-page form, just contact information and saying, yeah, we think we have something and we want to participate. Okay, the next step, and all the steps from here, you got to start building up this pyramid. You have to, everything has to be eligible for you to have eligible cost reimbursed. So the very next step, and I put it here, is you have to figure out who you are. If you're a government agency, then you're eligible under this program because all government agencies everywhere are eligible under this program for this disaster. If you're a private nonprofit agency, you have to fill out it's called PMP questionnaire. You have to fill out a couple of forms, and you need to supply some backup documentation to prove that you are a nonprofit, basically. So if you're a PMP, it's a little tricky, so I didn't want to get into too much detail here. Contact your state agent right away. Ask them what the requirements are for you to prove your eligibility for the program. If you participated after Sandy or ever once before, then unless things have changed, you still are an eligible applicant. The private nonprofits that are eligible for FEMA are ones that are acting for, they're serving the public. They're ones that are very similar to a government agency. So it could be houses of worship, community centers, libraries. In this event, I would encourage, if not you, but other people, nursing homes, rehabilitation centers, facilities where people are staying overnight, because I believe that they would have some costs and they may not know that they're eligible under this program because they are a private nonprofit and not a government agency. So the first step, reach out to OEM. The second step, figure out who you are. And then everything from that point in this pyramid is really dependent on the disaster. So I'm going to go through a couple of specifics about what FEMA has made eligible, or sort of what they've said about this disaster for you to try to wrap your head around what kind of work elements you want to present to them. So for all disasters for public assistance, it's open to eligible states, local government, and private nonprofit facilities. In this disaster, they've only allowed emergency protective measures to be covered, which makes sense because we didn't have physical damage due to a hurricane or something like that. Emergency protective measures is kind of a broad category. So we'll go through some examples, and you may see some documentation about some examples, but you yourself may be charged with your own agency to think about what is it that you had to do to protect your employees or the public in this incident. And those things can be eligible emergency protective measures. It is a broad category, and a lot of what they're focusing on in the documentation they're presenting is on the ins and outs of what a hospital could reimburse for instance. A lot of medical conditions and things. But think about it for yourself. What have you been impacted with? And is it related to these couple statements I'm going to have? Emergency protective measures are necessary actions taken to protect the public or to lessen or avert the threat of a catastrophe. Emergency protective measures are the steps you've taken or the actions taken to ensure the continuation of essential services. So whether you're a PMP or a local government, you have essential services or critical services. In order to safely ensure that, because you have your own staff that you need to protect and keep in mind as well. So all of the, see if I can get my mouse there. The public assistance program sometimes covers all of this. In this case, they've just selected emergency protective measures as being eligible. You may hear people refer to that as category B because these are the different categories for the program. So some of the examples that had been presented as eligible, though or may be eligible because there are a lot of factors to determine eligibility. But this is just a list, it's not an inclusive list of everything. So disinfection of eligible public facilities, purchasing supplies to reduce the spread of germs, dissemination of information to the public to provide health and safety warnings or guidance, transporting and pre-positioning equipment and other resources for response, activation and operation of an emergency operations center, temporary workforce performing eligible emergency work. It could be due to high illness-related absenteeism or moving people around. Security and law enforcement. In order for your emergency protective measures to be an eligible expense under this program, they must be taken by an eligible applicant, so building up the pyramid. They have to be the legal responsibility of the applicant to perform it. And they have to be, the facility has to be within this county covered by the declaration, but that was a nationwide declaration. Oops. So those bullets were for the lower half of the pyramid. The work must be in response to the pandemic. So the work and the cost now are these are the elements where you really need to tie it to the pandemic. Every disaster, if it's a hurricane or an earthquake or anything, you have to always tie your costs and your work to the incident. If you can't make that connection and you can't make it in documentation, then there's no connection. We can't prove it. So work will be emergency protective measures. It can be many things. Costs can be labor, materials, equipment, contracts, any costs that you've incurred that are directly related to your response to the COVID-19 pandemic. These are things that likely were, these are actions that you've taken by the direction of the public health official. So a lot of this is already going to be documented for you, and that's a good thing. Any of your costs have to be in compliance with standard policies, and any of your contracts must have been properly procured for federal program requirements. Because this funding comes from FEMA, all federal rules and regulations have to be followed in order to accept that funding. And that's where FEMA can get tricky and where people may say it's a headache to work with. You have to just prove your compliance, and then you should get hung up on anything. Because it's federal funds, you have to meet all federal rules and regulations. The last note here, the incident period for this is January. It started on January 20th, 2020. Every disaster declaration, there's an incident period. That's when the cost can be incurred within. So from January 20th, you can go back and see what expenses you may have had all the way through today, tomorrow, and until they close this incident period. Those are the eligible costs within that period. So as I mentioned, it's a reimbursement program. So there's a request for reimbursement form that you'll fill out, and you'll back it with supporting documentation, and that's how you'll get your that's how you'll get a payment. In order to do that, you have to first prepare the grant application, and this will all be done through New Jersey OEM, and they'll support you. It'll be done through FEMA's online portal. But I wanted you to sort of know what the end picture is. You present your eligible work, they write up a grant. When the grant goes through all of the FEMA reviews, the grant will become obligated. The money will sit with New Jersey until you fill out this form that's on the right. This is a request for a reimbursement. This pays you out on actuals for the costs that you incur. So this is, you don't need all of the cost details specifically done when you request participation and when you get your grant together, but when you want to get your reimbursement check back, you need to have everything very well justified. I mentioned before, but FEMA's actually issued that COVID-19 will have a simplified approach. So FEMA will be not providing field support for this one, and everything will be done through the FEMA grants portal. New Jersey also will be having you upload things through their portal. So it's a little complicated in New Jersey. It's just duplicative, but it's New Jersey, like I said, is well versed in this, and they should be able to help you through all of these steps. And so really, I hope I showed you that first, for everyone, it's easy to get started. You contact the state, you figure out if you're eligible, and then you can sit down and look at what you've spent and look at how you've documented it, and you can decide how much it's worth it to you to participate in this program. The minimum project size is $3,300. So if you've spent $3,300 on this incident, then you can participate in the program. Participation is one thing, but you may also want to aim for a couple of these goals that we have here. You want to maximize your funding, you want to accelerate your funding, and you want to keep it in the end. So all of this boils down to proper documentation. Since we're still in the incident period, you can adjust how you are collecting and tracking your documents. I can answer any questions you have on that. There's a lot of different things you could do. It's very specific to the kind of work that you're tracking. Most of you already have tracking measures in place. It's just a matter of, is it compliant with FEMA requirements? So could you tweak something now to show something on a daily time record, as opposed to having to go back and look all that up or figure it out or see if you even can at that point put in the detailed description of the activity that FEMA requires to say, yeah, that related to COVID-19, I buy this. Thank you for showing it to me. So it's a detailed process. And so what FEMA, I want to encourage you to go for this, because there are a lot of details that are required, but it should be pretty straightforward. It is tough to meet all of FEMA's requirements, but I trust that New Jersey will help you through that process. And the best thing you can do is to try to think about it now while you're still, everything's fresh in your mind and you're still accumulating costs, so that you can document it and adjust how you present everything formally in all of your documentation. I also want to stress that documentation doesn't have to be a report through some system. It can be an email, it can be notes that you've taken. It has to be documented. It doesn't have to be, spelled out to everybody. It's very hard to go back and do that. And normally FEMA comes in months later, and that's what we do, and that's why it takes a long time. You go back through documents. Do it now. Make a daily activity track of anything related to COVID with any of your agencies or any of your staff. Just keep a notebook. That kind of change today could really help you to maximize, accelerate, and keep your funding down the road. Okay, so here are the let's go through some examples and see if I can help get some ideas flowing. But I have to start with eligibility is a FEMA decision. I've supported people in trying to prepare their packages for FEMA, all their reimbursement paperwork. It's been boxes of paperwork, but ultimately it's FEMA's decision. I just have to say that. So we can try to present our eligibility determinations, but FEMA is the final say on that. Okay, so here's a scenario that maybe you all have an emergency protective measure you might have all done. You might have disinfected facilities, or you might have purchased supplies like hand sanitizers and things for your employees. Okay, so if you've purchased supplies, first you want to think about, is this an eligible expense under this program? Okay, is it eligible and do I have the documentation? Those are kind of the two pieces you want to think about. You obviously right away think about receipts. Do you have the receipts? How about proof of purchase, you know, beyond a receipt, or in some cases you'll need quotes, you know, an itemized list. If it came from your stockroom, it's still eligible for reimbursement. You would have to show what the cost would be to replace it if you didn't already replace it. So what is it for? You always have to say how it ties into this disaster. You can't just have bought a lot of stuff because maybe you're hoarding it. So you need to say, I bought this and this is how I used it. This is where it went. This is the quantity that was needed. This is the quantity needed on a daily basis, whatever you have to say. Okay, you were disinfecting a facility. Well, what was the facility? Was it necessary for you to disinfect it? Did it have, you know, was it a closed facility? Are you a public school that closed? Okay, well, back January 20th, you probably weren't closed. So if you've upped your disinfection then that's something that's eligible. But you have to think through all that. You have to make the connections for them to be able to look through your packet of supporting documentation and say, okay, yeah, these are costs we can get behind. The dots need to be connected. So these questions, and we'll leave you with the presentation, you can go through and see, you know, think about it in terms of whatever project or activity you're thinking of now. Is it COVID-19 related? Okay, was it performed in the incident period or purchased in the incident period? That's what you want to think about. And, you know, is it outside of what you normally do? You know, how can you show that? Do you need to show it? Maybe it was dictated to you that you do it. In regards to disinfectant, you know, there are some things that are going to seem kind of obvious and you probably don't need as much information, but I wanted you to think of, I wanted to show you the process of thinking about this. We have to fill that eligibility pyramid. How do we do it? It's not just a receipt that you turn in. It's a combination of documents. You can write a memo about it. You can prepare a spreadsheet. That's the kind of format that you're going to want. Tell the narrative behind it, and these are the kind of questions you want to ask. So the documents. Any costs really need to be broken down, especially if not everything is eligible, and we'll get into that with contracts. You know, make sure there's a quantity, make sure we know where you purchased it from. Then the PA cost categories at the bottom of the screen. We're talking about a material, you know, a purchase that you made. But depending on what it is, probably not for disinfectants, you may have staff time that was used to make this purchase. You may have equipment to go and transport these items. You may have additional materials, or you might have purchased these things through contracts. So these are the different cost categories and how you frame it in that request for reimbursement. But it's okay to start with like, okay, what did we do? Oh, we purchased some things. How did we do it? And then you break through, you ask yourselves, did we have any time spent doing that? Did we have any equipment that was used to do this? I'm going to go through a couple more examples, or just two more examples, and I think we'll get into that a little more. So another example I thought you might have would be contract services for cleaning, for instance. So if it's an existing contract versus if you had a change order, you have to document that the scope of work was in relation to an emergency protective measure, so in relation to COVID-19. But for contracts, it has to follow federal procurement regulation, so there's a lot of contract documentation that you're going to have to supply, even if it's an existing contract, to show a reasonable cost, procurements were according to standard policy, and that whatever costs you're claiming have to basically come clearly out of that contract quote, you know, or if it's not something that not a contract that you activated just for this response, but something you already had, maybe cleaning crews came at a more frequent interval, you need to have the documentation to tie that to COVID-19. Again, when the work was performed is important, the quantity, those kinds of things always have to be stated so that all of the costs are tied to that eligible work, and that eligible work has to be related, directly tied to COVID-19. So for contracts, any contract services, you're going to want your contract agreement, your procurement policies, as much detail about the cost as you can. If you did a cost analysis, like a bid analysis, your proof of purchase, that you pay the contractor. You have to show your scope of work. Hopefully the invoices also show some sort of progress report detailing the scope of work. If there was a change to the scope of work for COVID-19. And then just, the tying it to the event, why was this made, at the direction of a public health official. Sometimes you just need to say, like, this wasn't, sometimes you really need to tie it to FEMA's like terminology for the incident. So we did this because this was what our public health officials were saying we should do. Okay, and then finally, anything related to labor. So if you have temporary staff or backfill staff or reassigned staff, labor under this category of work is tricky, and I didn't want to get into it. If it's your normal budgeted employee, it's only overtime time that's eligible. But if you bring in contract temporary staff, something like that, then their time doing eligible emergency protective work is all eligible, both straight and overtime. So there are nuances. If you have labor costs, then you should run those through New Jersey. But you would get the employee's pay rate plus their fringe benefits. That's how you calculate how much reimbursement you would get for their time. So because it's based on time, you need your time records, payroll policies, those types of things. The important thing here is that people need to document what they're doing very specifically. That's where you could kind of go back now while it's fresh and have people do that. If you don't document what they're doing, if you don't have a cost code specific to this incident, but even beyond that, just what were they doing, you may not get any of this time. So the documentation for labor can be burdensome, but there's a lot of cost there for your own employees. This is a reimbursement program, but these are operations costs that you could recuperate if you document it correctly. So I encourage you to look at it. For any kind of labor reimbursement, you're going to want to look at and estimate out fringe benefits, which can be estimated as a whole, or it could be people's actual benefits, your timesheet data, your payroll data, all of your policies. Everything has to be in line with your policies. So the policies at the time the incident started need to be sent in with all this documentation. But if they drove a truck around and posted signs, the time in that vehicle, even if the labor was straight time, the time that they were in the vehicle using that piece of equipment, which is the truck, would be eligible. So you need to show the straight time operator's time to get the equipment usage that's associated with it. I don't want to go into too much, but equipment usage can also be heavy equipment. FEMA has equipment rates for all sorts of equipment. So if you did have to move big things around or anything like that, you can look up the FEMA equipment rates to see how much each hour of a backhoe was, for instance. Then again, materials and supplies could just be, in your more standard operations or things that were needed. If you're disseminating information, you need, or if you're putting up barricades or whatever, you may also be tapping into some materials and supplies that are eligible. Rented equipment is also a category for FEMA. And the last thing I wanted to mention is donated resources. If you are using volunteers for anything that's eligible work, then if you record the volunteer hours, you can actually use that towards the 25% of your cost share. So you would get an additional grant for the volunteer time back. So that's something that you want to make sure you're recording. So everything is going to be, through the portal. They're going to develop a grant for you. It's called the project worksheet. And you don't need to have every single detail of the cost presented, but you need most supporting documentation to prove it's eligible. Then you are going to submit a request for reimbursement form. And that form is going to be, as you can see on the right here, just, and they're all on the New Jersey EM Grants website, all the forms, so you can see how you want to collect information to be compliant with FEMA. But these forms are just forms. You're going to really, it's the forms roll up and summarize and say, this is the exact amount of force account labor I want to claim for this project. Everything that supports and justifies those costs is going to be part of your supporting documentation. So that was a really fast trip through, public assistance and what municipalities may want to be considering right now while this is going on, and into the future. It's going to be a recovery of 6 months to a year likely, so you have some time to pull all this together. You have to sign up for the program. It's not something that's just automatically given to you, so you have to contact OEM and let them know right away that you're interested. It is documentation heavy, but a lot of it you can prepare from scratch. You can write up a summary, you can have things signed off. So just I encourage you to think about that now, and any changes you can make to have things be more compliant. If you are procuring new contracts, make sure you're following federal rules and regulations. So in general, I'm put up this New Jersey, we are Jersey strong here, right? It's a great state to work in regarding this. You guys have many of you been through this in the past. So don't be discouraged. I want you to really know, even if you're a small agency, if you had at least $3,300 in costs, you can participate. And it matters as much to the state as these large hospitals and state agencies and their great, large costs for this program. So don't be discouraged if you're not getting feedback from them. You can hire consultants to help you walk through the process, which is a reimbursable expense under any administration for the grant. Time that you spend doing things like this, learning about it, or doing the applicant's briefing. If you record that time, that's actually something you could reimburse as well. So there are just a lot of nuances to it. I hope that I gave you enough information to show you where to go for more information. And I hope that you are all interested. And I wish you a speedy recovery, because it's nice to have this to focus on, because it is a crazy time. So thank you for Morris County Chamber of Commerce. This was really great. And Megan, I'll pass it back to you now.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. So we did receive a question from Rick Blood. He wants to know, how do reimbursements work for EMS? Hourly rate for volunteers in the past, FEMA only reimbursed overtime and equipment hours.
Emergency protective measures is a category of work for FEMA that has the labor that is only eligible if it's overtime. So if it's a budgeted employee and it's overtime, or they have straight and overtime, you would only get the cost for the labor part for overtime. If it's some kind of contracted or temporary employee, then you could get all of their time. I think that was the whole question, but, and then equipment is a little bit funny, if equipment was part of that, but I mean, EMS would be eligible, and I think you'd have a lot of expenses, and the state can certainly help you walk through all of that.
Great. All right. So Wendy has a question about deep cleaning. So can we project costs based on current usage for deep cleaning? I'll unmute you, Wendy, if you want to.
Yeah, I was actually, I just meant, like, you were talking about a time period, right? Starting in January.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say starting in March, somebody decided, you know what, I need to deep clean, we clean our offices or we clean our facility, but now I need to go above and beyond and do a deep cleaning. And you're going to be doing that for the next however many months. That's what I meant, like, by projecting it. Like, can you oh, I
Yes.
spent this much in March, so I'm going to be spending that in April, in May, in June.
Yes.
Okay.
Until they close the incident period.
Okay.
We don't know when this will end, but until then, if you are trying to prepare the PW, the grant application, and you want to project out, it's an estimate at the level, at the time when you're making your grant, it's an estimate. They approve everything and they obligate the money to the state. The state will only issue it to you when you've shown your justification for costs. So that's when you get paid on actual.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna unmute everyone. Does anyone have any questions of
Yes.
Kelly? You can ask now.
Why to do the first SAP?
Hello? Is that Maria?
Oh, hello, Megan. I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was. Somehow you unmute me. No, I have no question for her. Actually, thank you very much for all the info.
You're welcome.
Great. Okay, anyone else? Any questions? Okay, so so this presentation is recorded, and so it will be posted on our website and also forwarded, so you please share with your colleagues, clients that would benefit from it. And I just want to thank you, Kelly, for sharing all of your knowledge and expertise. Thank you for quote, coming to New Jersey today virtually.